Welcome to Inside the Issues. I'm Amrit Singh. For all the theorizing and political grandstanding around the Trump tariff plan, one place we can quantify direct impact is our local ports, which are the busiest in the nation. Well, today we got some new numbers from the Port of Los Angeles, and you might be surprised by how they compare to the months before the trade war. Last month, the Port of LA handled over 9% more cargo than April of 2024. Shipments were also up during the first 4 months of this year in total. And if you're wondering why port volume continued to tick up even as tariff talk ramped up too, we have some context for you from a person who knows and knows all too well. Joining me now is the executive director of the Port of Los Angeles, Gene Seroka. Always an honor to have you in here because you know it so well, Gene. Thanks for coming in.
Great to see you, Amrit.
So we happen to have you here on this day where you shared some of the most recent information and data when it comes to what we're seeing with port volume. So let's talk about it. 9.5% roughly up from April of last year. Tell us what's going on.
This is the end of the front loading or building inventory on the import side of the business. The discussion really started last summertime during the campaign trail when the topic of new trade policy and tariffs came in. Some of the larger companies began bringing in even more product, thinking that tariffs would someday be a reality. And they bet right. So now we started to see, with the escalation of tariffs back on April 2nd, that front loading will probably come to an end here with those April numbers. In fact, the first week of May saw the volume at the Port of Los Angeles drop by more than 30% on the import side of the ledger, with 145% tariffs out of China.
Right, and that's on China, and we should talk a little bit about the percentage of volume that comes to the Port of LA from China as opposed to other countries. And you were telling me during the first Trump administration, it was roughly 60%, and now it's?
About 45% and dropping, Amrit.
And that's a response to these tariffs, which were aggregated at 145%, now down to 30%. So what's your expectation now for this 90-day window where these tariffs are down to 30%, which is still considerable and still more than it is on many other countries on the nation? What will that do to the Chinese importation?
All right. Well, first, 90 days is not a long runway in our business. Right. That's equivalent to a merchandiser sending an order to Asia, having the factory produce the product and simply get it ready for shipment here to Los Angeles. So this is where it gets a little complex. But what I see right now is that bookings or reservations for shipments have ticked up since the tariff went down to 30%. And you'll probably see importers scooping up the product that was already manufactured that they need to get out and into the inventory system. After that, I believe many companies, large and small, will be selective because these prices at 30% or more are going to make products expensive.
And you have said that investors, economists, consumers, I mean, frankly, everybody in the world likes a little certainty. And what you've described this as a whiplash, a whipsaw, and a degree of uncertainty. And that includes China with 90 days from now.
It truly is, and I think it was capsulized last week very well, that since January there have been 55 announcements on trade policy, tariffs up and down, in and out. And for the average person that does the importing or exporting for their company, that's a lot to keep up with. And now we've got 10% tariffs on all countries except China, Canada, Mexico. We see potentially increases coming on bananas, coffee, juice concentrate, in addition to what we've been traditionally looking at, retail level imports coming in.
So we're thinking a bit about the fact that the Trump administration wants to do this because they want to spur domestic production. They want to restore some balance to trade imbalances, which also is a part of the Port of Los Angeles because we're talking about the imports, but there's also exports that go from the Port of LA. So just tell people at home some sense of proportionality of what comes in versus what goes out.
Right. We've had an imbalance for a long time, and it's basically 4 imports for every 1 export at the Port of Los Angeles. The balance 3 containers get repositioned back to Asia empty. So I think there's a real opportunity here as we start talking about trade policy and these bilateral negotiations to see if we can open up new markets or expand existing markets for U.S. ag, especially here in our Central Valley, and manufactured products.
And talk to me a little bit about the theory here, because President Trump, again, is saying that we want to spur domestic production, which some people might say, okay, the port director is coming on, and he's saying we're seeing declining importation, but the tariffs are designed to do that because we want to have more goods just coming from the United States. But you're saying also, I mean, more goods coming from the United States could also potentially export. So you stand to gain also from the tariffs to some degree, right? Just talk about if you see any use case of the tariffs that's beneficial for the ports, let alone the larger economy.
Like most things, Amrit, it's complex, it's nuanced. And we've got to be careful here because driving one lever could impact a whole bunch of other ones. For example, I believe in rules-based trade to protect the American interests and jobs and iconic brands. But at the same time, 70% of our economy is you and me spending at the retail level. And right now, we're starting to see the influx of these cargo containers at higher prices, which will likely be passed on to the consumers. So while we're looking to expand manufacturing jobs, American exports, all great, the consumer may take it in the wallet too. So we've got to find that balance. Let's protect those American interests, expand markets, know that our trading partners want to do the same thing. But in the middle, the factories in China supply to the American consumer spends.
Right, and we're thinking about the fact that you have to process all this volume, and some people think that this 90-day pause might mean at least temporarily a surge. A lot of people were saying that some of these containers have been packed and ready to go for what we saw, a rollback momentarily. So if you see a surge of volume, people might think to the pandemic. We saw these bottlenecks. I mean, the port logistics became a larger concern. You thought a lot about that. You've introduced some technology. Tell the people how much you do about it.
Yeah, I think we're in pretty good shape.
Okay.
The cargo on the ground today is less than 30% of what it was during the peak of the peak during COVID, when we had all those ships backed up in the ocean. We've got a line of sight up to 40 days before a container ship leaves its Asia origin coming to Los Angeles. And in our biggest trade lane, China, we've got a solid 14 days to plan our great skilled labor, the machinery, and the yard space to be able to manage this. So I like our chances. The port optimizer that we designed going back 9 years ago now has a truck appointment system, so we can take care of additional capacity that way. And the insights we gain from this data will make us a little bit smarter to see over hills and around corners.
And let's also talk about the fact that President Trump has been looking at all of this, and he's been looking at a lot of the companies who are bringing in the goods. And some of them are saying, look, we're going to have tariff transparency. For instance, Amazon, there was some confusion as to which aspect of Amazon, but they're saying this is the price with tariffs. What do you say to President Trump, or what should you say in general about the fact that President Trump says that these companies should, quote unquote, eat the costs of these tariffs, not pass them on? You worked with importers in these companies your entire career. How likely are they to do that, and for how long would they be able to do that?
Well, right now, this offers an opportunity to do a number of things on the import side of the ledger. I know importers are talking to their manufacturers overseas to see if they can share in these increased costs. Some debate on how successful that will be. Looking internally at the company itself, they're trying to find efficiencies, cost savings models to help share some of that burden as well. And looking at times to pass on to the consumer. And just last week, we heard some iconic brands saying that they were going to pass on costs, and there was a little bit of blowback from that. Right. But from what I have in my discussions learned, it is clear that folks are looking for every opportunity to try to mitigate, and they know that the American consumer is going to be price sensitive. We're pretty tapped out after all that inflation. We don't want to see it pick up again. But these choices are difficult. If a company were to just eat the tariffs, they then will have to make other decisions. It could mean slowing down on hiring or letting people go, fewer opportunities to invest in capital equipment or real estate for bigger stores. So there are choices that have to be made, and I know these folks are looking really hard at this.
And all these aspects you're talking about, also when you think about the port itself, your employees, your hiring, your logistics, your capital expenditures you're doing to make sure that everything is green. In our final moment, just talk about how everything is going there from a staffing standpoint and beyond with what we're seeing here with the port volume.
Now, over the last 10 years, Amrit, we've had a strong financial policy that will allow us to maintain our investment even through an economic cycle that's in front of us. So think of the infrastructure projects, the roads, the bridges, the rail. That'll all continue. 3,500 workers on the job construction side right now. I want to see those men and women out there every single day. Well,
we're understanding now the impact that this has on the volume there, and that there's a use case also for exports to go from that same volume that comes in. You don't want to send those containers back empty. So it's all a big conversation about getting some balance, and you're here to talk about it. Thank you so much for coming on this day, Gene. You're a great communicator around this, and we appreciate having you.
Great to see you as always,
Straight from the source. Thank you so much. Gene Seroka, Executive Director of the Port of Los Angeles.